the standard stuff like the Sidewinder and the MRAM. You have, of course, IRIS-T and SRAM, infrared-guided short-range air-to-air missiles, generally comparable to the AIM-9X. You have the METEOR as a long-range air-to-air missile. I've implemented Storm Shadow and kept 350 Taurus standoff missiles that work like JSON, so to speak. And we have the Brimstone missiles. I have implemented 2 versions. One with optical guidance like the AGM-65 Dream, and the Brimstone 2 using the guidance like the AGM-65L. So you are, of course, a little bit restricted to the guidance types supported in the sim.
Welcome to episode 8 of the Simulated Airspace, where we talk about flight sims and everything about aviation, but the main focus is on air combat simulation. We'll also go into Microsoft Flight Simulator and IL2 maybe later on. So if you're listening to on YouTube, we also have Spotify as Simulated Airspace as well. So if you want to go to Spotify and listen to that'll work as well. But thank you for listening, and let's get started here. So today we have Scorpion as our guest, and he creates 3D models and other aircraft mods from the other fighters' Mafia. And he created one of the most popular aircraft add-ons in BMS, the Eurofighter. Today we're going to get to know Scorpion 82 and how he got into BMS and how it was that he started. How did he start creating these aircraft add-ons for the sim? So it's going to give a quick introduction from our guests. So Scorpion 82, go ahead and give a quick introduction so people kind of hear your voice and kind of can go through the podcast for today.
Yes, hello. I'm Scorpion 82. You can simply call me Scorpion. I'm the guy behind the EF2000 Retro, BTO, and data add-ons for Falcon BMS 4.37 and 4.38. I'm running the EF2000 Retro Discord server and YouTube video channel in support of these BMS-based EF2-centric 1000 mods of mine. I'm also producing some other mostly BMS-related video content there, such as the BMS modding Tartaria series, as well as some work-in-progress footage on the OFM KTO add-on for 4.38 that I'm currently working on.
Thanks for the intro. I do look forward to this discussion about the Eurofighter, and maybe at the end we'll talk about the F-22 Raptor at the end there. So make sure we can talk about that later on. But here, I am Prime, but I'm going to introduce my co-host here, Figus. So go ahead and introduce yourself real quick. Pretty sure everyone knows you, but go ahead and give a quick little shout out.
Hey everyone, I'm Figus. Thanks for stopping by our podcast. I operate a small YouTube channel called Figus Fighties, where I have a few tutorials, some gameplay, and other types of videos on there. So feel free to check that out. It's called Figus Fighties.
Thanks for joining me, as always. And I'm Prime, or Aviation Plus on YouTube. I create all types of aviation-related content with BMS, DCS, and sometimes real life. So let's jump right into our interview here. So Scorpion, you're working on something that you said you was a Eurofighter. Why do you think it's important for the Falcon BMS community, and what other options does that give to the Falcon BMS community by being able to fly another aircraft based on its fidelity in the sim?
Well, whether it's important or not is to decide by the community. Everybody has his own priorities, interests, and personal preferences. So there are always people who are interested and people who are not interested. I guess the Eurofighter is not that popular within the BMS community, but as I like the aircraft, I'm working on it. So I like to fly it. And I guess many people simply value BMS in general also for the environment, not just for the high fidelity F-16 simulation, but simply for the dynamic campaign, the living battlefield environment, and so on. That is for me one of the reasons I simply like to also fly other aircraft in this particular environment, because there's no better one in my opinion.
Yeah, so the Eurofighter, you think it's the best one. So being that it's the Eurofighter and being that, like you said, it's a F-16 sim, how do you model a different aircraft, in this case specifically the Eurofighter, in a sim that was built for the Viper? How does that work?
Well, why Falcon 4.0 was originally conceived as a dedicated F-16 sim. Most people might not be aware of the fact that it was supposed to represent the first part of the electronic battlefield series that was supposed to feature a lot of different flyable aircraft over time, as well as seeders and so on. The EBS never materialized, but the provisions were built into the code of Falcon 4.0, and these provisions have, at least to some extent, been exploited by the community. So over the years, we have already seen certain additions, the so-called aircraft type and engine type settings in the aircraft data files, for example, point to specific custom code, and that already since SuperPack 3, so 24 years ago. Most people may not know it. And over the years, of course, the focus was on the F-16, but there have been several additions that were beneficial to all aircraft in general, and some were even not of relevance to the F-16, such as weapon base, for example, or carrier operations, and so on. So there is some room while you are essentially limited to F-16 systems modeling. You have plenty of options to choose from, so you can enable and disable specific systems, specific system functions. You can tune performance parameters. You can create custom sounds. At least to a certain extent, you are limited to the trigger conditions, which are first and foremost tailored to the F-16. Same is true for the cockpit. You have a lot of flexibility here and can in many ways customize, tailor, adapt an aircraft. So it's certainly not a high fidelity representation generally spoken, but as the F-16 is very realistically implemented and you can adapt quite a lot, you can create, let's say, a more immersive and realistic representation of various aircraft.
Well, I already learned something today because I had no idea for as long as I've been around BMS or and Falcon for that matter. In general, I had no idea that that was the original concept. That it was supposed to be something more with a larger scope than just being an F-16 sim. So that's pretty interesting to learn about.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they named it Falcon. So that usually it implements or kind of insinuates it's going to be the Falcon only, but they still wanted it to be other aircraft. So I guess they might have Falcon to be focused on the F-16, and maybe they thought ahead and say, hey, if we can't do other aircraft, at least we'll be good with the Falcon, the Viper, or whatever. So I don't know. That is something I learned too. They wanted more stuff to be implemented for aircraft. Maybe Falcon 5.0 everybody's talking about might do that, but who knows? There's very little information about it, and we'll see whatever it gets out here. So usually, people in the community, even in the DCS community, the folks that make mods for the simulators, it's usually in their spare time, and especially if the mod is of course free, so it's their spare time. And I would assume that in BMS a mod would be free, so I assume that, and that's probably just it's true. It's going to be free with BMS. So with that being said, being in your spare time, and you mentioned that it was not high fidelity as people might be used to. What is the what is the push and pull, the like the line or the consideration you give to how much effort do you give to the mod versus it being like completely realistic? Because you said that it was low fidelity or not as fidelity as people say as want it to be. But so is it Viper avionics? Is it F-15 avionics? The flight model, like kind of go over that type of stuff and how you implement that and change it to be more towards the Eurofighter.
Well, it's about a lot of different aspects. So you have the external 3D model, and I, at this point, must correct, I'm not really a 3D modeler. I only implemented certain changes with a permission from the original authors. So 3D modeling, I have some experience, but not that much. Fixing some stuff, adding some stuff is one thing. But 3D models alone give you some options already in terms of realistic implementation of external lights, control surface animations, generally spoken, also retractable in-flight refueling probe or just a refueling door and so on. You can also set this in the aircraft data file, for example, for different aerial refueling types. You have options like a drag chute, which is available for the EF2000 and other aircraft as well that feature one. In terms of a flight model, of course, you have the simulation of the flight control system, the fly-by-wire system of the F-16. There's also the flight model code for the FA-18 included. You have analog and digital fly-by-wire systems. So you have a couple of choices. These are, of course, tailored to the aircraft that are more developed, that have some custom code. But you can nevertheless completely create your own data tables, lift rates, thrust, roll rates, and so on. And you can also, in many ways, control surface animation behaviors, engine nozzle animations, and so on. That's all driven by data. There's an underlying logic, and I guess the vast majority of people simply don't know about this detail. So there's a lot of detail work that you can do. As said, you can customize avionics, whether they are available, unavailable. For example, specific radar modes, specific HUD symbology, and so on. And why this is mostly tailored to the F-16. If you are looking at the Eurofighter mod, you will see that the general HUD layout is more FA-18-like, but mixed with some F-16 symbology. You can customize any kinds of indicators in the cockpit, for example, emulating at least some avionic functions. It's not, I would call it emulating rather than really simulating, but these options exist also for some general aircraft systems. For example, as said, custom sounds are theoretically possible. So you have options where you have to draw the line is really when it comes to coding. So coding can only be done by those who have the skills in the first place, and of course those who have access to the source code. There are currently no interfaces available, external programming interfaces. Is there might be for DCS, I don't know. I'm not too familiar with it. But for BMS, it's currently not a thing. So as a third-party modder, you are restricted to that stuff. But the flight model can nevertheless feel quite different. You have custom weapon loadouts as well, and so on. So there's a lot that you can do, and to some extent, I would say even more than with some DCS third-party mods, but that depends on the mod. So there are also some out there like the Flanker, the Su-30, for example, which has some custom avionics and so on, but many of the third-party mods, community mods for DCS are simply based on other aircraft avionics as well. The advantage is that you have a greater flexibility because you have many more aircraft that you can basically work on.
Interesting. So I've noticed in BMS there is a base model Eurofighter in BMS. I'm wondering if that base model and the Eurofighter that you're working on are the same, or are they kind of different? And what kind of differences do they have with the mod and the base model that the Eurofighter comes with in BMS?
The Eurofighter has been in BMS from its inception. It has been around in older mods for Falcon 4.0, generally spoken. And what you can see in BMS is, let's say, a more simplistic implementation of the aircraft. It has an original flight model, for example. It uses the F-16's cockpit. I have provided some data, some database work and stuff to the BMS team. Some of it was incorporated, but a lot of changed since then. So some of the custom sounds that I've created for my mod, the cockpit itself and the advanced flight model and also further data work is not available by default. It has been included in the past in the in the other fighters, Mafias, add-on CADAs, as I'm a member of that group. And I've also created the separate EVE 2000 Retro, BTO, and data mods, which are centered around this aircraft and which include additional content that is not specifically impacting the simulation of the aircraft itself, but more the environment, such as custom campaigns, custom user interface background screens, and so on. Game mode implementation, for example, flying the EVE 2000 in instant action mode as well. Yeah, and stuff like that.
So we mentioned a little bit earlier about the OFM, the Other Fighters Mafia. Kind of explain what they're about and what kind of the stuff they do in for the Falcon BMS community.
So the Other Fighters Mafia, as its name tells, has been primarily dealing with other fighters than the F-16, so other aircraft than the primary flyable aircraft. The group has been around since early 2021, so also before the 15C was introduced. That group was originally formed to perform some bug fixes on the FA-18 Hornet, especially the 3D cockpit was a little bit compromised after the release of BMS 4.35 due to new and changing callbacks. And from there on, they have expanded to also work on other aircraft. I was personally invited to join that group in June 2022 due to my work on the Eurofighter. So there are a lot of aircraft in there, also a lot of additional aircraft as AI assets, so no high quality included to cover very different theater scenarios, so theater maps, campaign scenarios, timescales, and so on. And so the group has since 4.36 supported around a dozen different add-on theaters, all using a custom database that was unified. So you have a lot of options. Some are, let's say, more, some are less realistic. So different people with different interests are working on different stuff. And that's what they have been doing. The last versions are for 4.37, so there's currently no 4.38 compatible version out, and that's what I'm currently working on.
And for me, I've had some downloaded some of their stuff. They have theaters. I think they had Nevada Theater for a little while. They have, of course, airplanes as well, and I'm gonna go in their Discord actually. They have the Tornado, they have the Tomcat, the Hornet. So they're in different levels of completion, but there are some other aircraft that they are working on that other people might like, and based on the different levels of completion or fidelity of it, it depends on who's using it and what information is actually available to be able to use that in the sim. So speaking of other aircraft and what's available for them, what type of documents do you use to maybe model the Eurofighter? Do you have any like SMEs, any special people who fly the aircraft or available to be tested out and make sure it's somewhat accurate or not completely out in left field? Do you have anybody helping you out?
I'm dealing with the aircraft and the programs since 3 decades. I have some pretty good sources, and yes, there were also 2 pilots that were doing some validation testing of the flight model that I've created for it. So I guess it's within the given constraints decent, but there's always a room for grow.
So so with that, we all know it's been years now, but DCS is thinking about getting a Eurofighter. Um, are I don't know if you play DCS, but we can talk about DCS. Do you play DCS at all? And are you interested in at least looking at, or at least the videos that come out with the new Eurofighter in DCS whenever that may come out?
I have DCS installed, but I'm not really flying it much. Of course, the Eurofighter interests me. There has been a Eurofighter module proposed back in 2012 already by another company that was cancelled in 2017. And in the last announcement, we are waiting since 6 years already. So yes, indeed, the Eurofighter is a primary reason why I'm interested in DCS in this respect. But of course, there are also some other good aircraft, like the Tomcat, for example.
Yeah, there are a lot of airplanes in DCS, and it does allow for other people to be able to fly them. And based on with Falcon BMS having two aircraft now, the F-15 and the F-16, usually people kind of side to which one they want to fly, and even if they want to fly both of them, there's only two of them. Actually, high fidelity with their own avionics. But in DCS, people like to fly multiple planes multiple times at different times, so they never really get good at a certain aircraft. And then when they do get good and skilled in an aircraft, they try another one and they have to start over basically with that other aircraft. So it's never like a an aircraft they stick with to be able to get good at it. And in DCS, you can kind of start doing that. But people do like other aircraft to fly. I don't know if it's just because of the flexibility of what they could do, or it's just the newness. They get bored with an aircraft at some point. But people do like new aircraft every now and then to be able to fly, and especially if in a giant package like, so you have different roles for different aircraft. So it is nice to have different capabilities of different planes. So let's talk about the capabilities. What other capabilities does the Eurofighter have? You kind of mentioned a little bit on the missiles and the turn radius and a little bit of the flight model, but what other actual missiles does the Eurofighter have that the F-16 or the F-15 does not have? Or weapons in general?
Real world or
Well,
in them?
in the sim, yeah, in BMS, what kind? I know there's a couple of uh of bombs that it has, and I think there's an IR missile, the Mika or something, or is that the Eurofighter, or is that something else?
Yes, you have the standard stuff like the Sidewinder and the MRAM. You have, of course, IRIS-T and SRAM, infrared guided short range air-to-air missiles, generally comparable to the AIM-9X. You have the METEOR as a long-range air-to-air missile. I've implemented Storm Shadow and kept 350 Taurus standoff missiles that work like JSON, so to speak. And we have the Brimstone missiles. I have implemented two versions. One with optical guidance like the AGM-65 Dream, and the Brimstone 2 using the guidance like the AGM-65L. So you are, of course, a little bit restricted to the guidance types supported in the sim. Yes, and a couple of dual mode bombs as well, like the GBU-48, which I have added to the database.
With the testing happening, have you had has let's see, do you know of any like
Uh,
squadrons that use the Eurofighter, like any BMS squadrons that use it?
no, not, there's one Spanish squadron, I think, that's using it. But other than that, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, it'd be cool to see if we can find someone who uses it specifically, because the Germans, the Spanish, so yeah, there's a couple of people that use it specifically. Do
There's
you
also
do you fly it in, or is it flown, to your knowledge, is it flown in like large packages type of things? Like does the OMF have any, like, to test as well, any larger packages with multiple airplanes, including the Eurofighter, to be able to test to see if its capabilities and give bug reports?
um, it's actually difficult to say as I'm not that much doing the testing within OFM. I think there are not enough people to test it on a large scale. It's mostly brief tests. I have some at least one beta tester who was, so to speak, working for me and working as a relative, and I've also um, doing, of course, many tests myself to ensure that everything works as expected. But a multiplayer, it would, of course, definitely be nice to get some feedback.
Oh yeah, yeah. Multiplayer would be little bit different, especially if you have two people in the same airplane, making sure that all the stuff works and all the lights and uh, the Link 16 and all that stuff.
All right, so Scorpion, can you tell us and the audience a bit more of who you are and how you got started? How you got started with flight sims and specifically Falcon and BMS.
Well, I've been fascinated by flying since my earliest childhood. When I was 7 years old, my older brother began to develop an interest for the armed forces with a focus on land and to a lesser extent naval forces. And due to my fascination of flying, I quickly, naturally developed an interest for the airborne component of the armed forces and then began to develop a genuine interest into modern day military aviation with a focus on jets. And as I grew up in the age of video and computer games already, I soon learned about the genre of flight games, flight sims. So that was, of course, interesting for me. I've been doing this since 1990, more or less. I was very young back then, 7 years only. Yes, Falcon 4.0 was for me. I was a day one player. I've already played Falcon 3.0. It was a great sim, so I was very excited about Falcon 4.0. And thereafter, I simply followed the community-driven evolution of it over the past quarter century, playing all the major mods that have been created by the community. So I was essentially also a day one player of BMS.
That's cool. So you've been around for quite a long time. So how did you get started with modding? What was like your first project or your first like little foray into modding?
Well, it was actually the introduction of the Eurofighter Typhoon into the world of Falcon 4.0 for the first time with the Super Spec 3 mod that was released in June 2002. The aircraft was included in the database but not implemented in game because it wasn't fully developed. I only discovered it in the retrospect, so to speak. So I was just curious, how can I fly this aircraft or not? How can it be made flyable? So I began to investigate that issue, discussing it on an F4 community board back then. And I was later on beta testing a non-public Eurofighter mod package for SuperPack 3. And when the aircraft was formally introduced, so to speak, with Free Falcon 2, I found that the Free Falcon 2 implementation was not as good as the one of the non-public beta test package for SuperPack 3. So I really got engaged with modding from October 2003 with the objective to simply bring the FF2 standard aircraft to an SP3 plus mod like standard. That was my first personal project. And when I was done, I discussed this also with the original author of this mod and then thought, why not sharing this with the community? So he greenlighted it. I released a mod, and from there I continued. Yeah.
So the Eurofighter has been a long what's the expression, an old love for you to getting it into various types of versions of BMS. I guess it can be said.
Yeah, definitely. I've produced already 22 major mods for Super Pack 4, Free Falcon 2 through 5, Open Falcon 4.5, and I also got work directly integrated with Open Falcon 4.6 and 4.7, and was also working on the Free Falcon team on Free Falcon 5.0. So there got my work integrated, and I also managed to inspire other people to do some work such as cockpits. That was something I wasn't proficient in at the time at all. Yeah, and continued later with BMS, albeit I discontinued public mod development after 2010 for a couple of different reasons. For many years, really returned only in 2022 when 4.36 was released.
I see.
Yeah.
Go on, Bram. Sorry,
Oh,
you had
I
something to say.
was wondering because you've been since the beginning of BMS at least, and you talked about Open Falcon and Falcon 4.0 and 3.0. What is your, I don't know about your interest, but your expectation from the Falcon 5.0 introduction a couple years ago? Everybody's like asking what is going on with it. Is it going to have this? Is it going to have that? Something, uh, better graphics, and it's going to be a replacement of BMS. What is your expectation slash like vibe that you get from Falcon 4.0, and are you going to be helping out with it, which other people might ask?
You mean Falcon 5.0 or 4.0?
Oh, 5.0, Falcon 5.0.
No, I have no connection to it, and to be honest, I will simply wait and see. I'm pretty good at managing expectations.
Like with your the other ones, it went from 3.0 to 4.0. What was some of the, I guess, the big milestones they would have? Is it graphics? Is it aircraft? Like in your experience, what was the general milestone that a whole digit of number would be would upgrade in the game?
If we take it this way, Falcon BMS would more than be justified to get a 5.0
That's fair.
or higher assigned.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um, so the question is always what's the priority for developers? So the little that we got on 5.0 is that it will be less high fidelity than BMS. That's okay for me. As long as it remains halfway reasonable. Better graphics, yes, it's not the most important aspect for me, to be honest. I'm more concerned about the overall game design, game modes, the simulation of the environment. That's very important to me.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Okay, so what was your idea of wanting to work all the way back then? What was the initial inspiration of wanting to bring Eurofighter into BMS and into Falcon, for that matter?
Well, there are simply no good Eurofighter sims out there other than Digital Image Design's EF2000, and that one is 3 decades old. Was also the inspiration for the EF2000 Retro add-on for BMS 4.37. And so there were simply no other alternatives. I really liked Falcon 4.0 since it was released, even long before the Eurofighter was available, because it's simply a great sim, and I simply like to fly aircraft that I like in the sims that I like, and Falcon 4.0 has been my go-to sim for nearly 3 decades. So yes, it was simply the idea to get the Eurofighter working or working better. I didn't introduce it. I simply expanded on what was available. And that was the principal idea. Had there been better alternatives, of course, I would have picked them, but they were none available. So I created what I could create myself.
Now that you bring that up, because personally I am not familiar with the, because you a lot of what you did, I from what I interpret your work, the stuff that you're saying, I a lot of the things that you did or you do, you take a lot of it inspiration wise, and some of the systems, I would say, or some of the visual aspect of things from an older sim. Can you tell myself, because I don't know about this sim, and the audience about this sim that you've been using, this older ancient sim, if I can use that term?
Well, Digital Image Design's EF2000 was, so to speak, just as groundbreaking and influential for the genre at the time of its release as was Falcon 4.0 3 years later. It was actually the first, to my knowledge, combat flight simulator to feature a fully dynamic campaign, but it was turn-based, not real-time. It had a huge theater map with 4 million square kilometers, with a terrain elevation model and full texture mapping that was pretty new at the time. It had actually first generation virtual reality support. Yes, 3 decades ago, EF 2000 did it. And it was also, if I'm not mistaken, the very first combat flight sim that offered a virtual 3D cockpit and relied on it. You had some close zoom in to the views of the MFDs and so on that you could click on with a mouse. You had a decent AI for the time and a radio comms system that was also back then new. Today it's standard, but back then it was revolutionary. A very good viewing system, good game mode, so custom combat like dogfight mode in BMS. You had a lot of single mission sims, and you could actually also fly in co-op in the fully dynamic campaign, which was also a first. So there was a lot of stuff. You can still play this sim today. Takes a bit of effort, but if you know what you're doing, it's not that difficult. With some resolution upscaling and so on, that works. I still play it from time to time, but not that much anymore.
Oh, that's pretty fun. So what are some of the key differences between the Eurofighter and the F-16 that we have in BMS? Like, I think we all understand, or most of us understand, that the Eurofighter that we have, that you put into BMS, is not full fidelity, but it does have, like, what are some of the appeals other than just weapons? What are some of the appealing things? I know you mentioned the turn radius, the better engine, but like, are there like some specific systems that you manage to kind of simulate and implement? So that sort of thing.
Well, I've implemented emulating the aircraft's electronic warfare system to some extent with customized symbology. The DAS format of the real aircraft, that's the electronic warfare format, so to speak, on the Eurofighter, is implemented to some extent with custom symbology, custom flare dispenser, quantities, positions, ejection vectors, loadouts, and so on. You have some custom captions on the MFDs that appear as in the real aircraft. Cockpit, of course, I tried to map the F-16 cockpit functions as good as possible on the Eurofighter. So there are commonalities, there are also differences, and you sometimes have to be a little bit creative. So operating the aircraft is, of course, a little bit different than that. Other than this, you have, let's say, unique mixture of avionics settings that are used by the different F-16 variants and versions. So I tried to best match the capabilities of the real aircraft in this respect within these boundaries. So this avionics mix is a little bit unique. You have differences in radar performance. I created a workaround for looking infrared sensor for it that doesn't compromise the weapon loadouts. Yes, and some custom sounds, mostly cockpit audios, related also to the electronic warfare systems, mostly, but not only.
You had you implement some of that stuff. What about the RCS, the radar cross section? Did you adjust that to what you think the Eurofighter is? Or did you have the ability to adjust the radar cross section of it?
A little bit, yes, but the simulation of signatures in BMS or Falcon 4, generally spoken, is relatively simplistic. Real data are hard to come by, so it's more or less simply taking into account that specific RCS reduction measures were taken on the airframe, but it's nothing like an F-22 or F-35. So the advantage compared to the F-16 isn't big.
So it's about the same as a 16-ish. And I know from the front, I know that has the S bins for the engine. So you said that the RCS modeling is simplistic in BMS. Is it like just a number you give and it's the same RCS all around, or does it have a little bit more fidelity than that, or is that pretty much it?
You have a reference value for the F-16, that's 1.0. It's not specifically stated what exactly the RCS is meant to be. Maybe 3 square meters or 5, no idea. That's roundabout the typically cited region. And you have, of course, some differences dependent on aspect angle, so side aspect and rear aspect influence that one, but you don't set it specifically. It's, so to speak, hard-coded.
Okay, cool.
So, Scorpion, where did you get some of the resources and technical information for the flight models, the systems, and all that other stuff for your Eurofighter?
Well, as I said, I'm dealing with the programs, the aircraft since a long time. I have some good inside sources and also a lot of research. I have an aviation background, generally spoken, so also a certain understanding of the subject matter. And yes, if you have developed a certain understanding of certain things, then you can also do some good guesstimates, also with a couple of reference data. Not all of them are easily available. Yes, it's not all encompassing. It's not 100% accurate, but at least a fair deal closer than what you get by default.
All right. So we earlier we brought up the other fighters mafia OFM. Can you tell us a bit more about the projects that they're working on? I've heard about an F-22. So can you tell us about that project, about that Raptor model or adaptation, and other projects you might the OFM might have in the works that you are at liberty to discuss?
Well, at the moment, I'm essentially reviving the OFM, so to speak. The problem was that the key member, if could be said, he was a key member because he did really a lot of work and he did really great work, but he went missing at the end of 2024. So the group was a little bit struggling. I was merely a contributor and felt quite comfortable with this position, but I was asked back then whether I could take over. I was told it was only temporary, so okay, I accepted, did it, but I was also working on the EF2000 retro add-on at the time, so it was a little bit challenging. I did the conversion of these theaters for update 6 of 4.37 and thereafter focused on my own work. And when 4.38 came out, I first focused on my own work in shape of EF 2000 BTO and later on EF 2000 data. I was also a little bit time constrained. Nobody else was either willing or able to do it, so I have decided, because of course there was the interest, I know, so I've decided to rewrite at least the KTO version, so to speak, but took a new approach. So the OFM KTO for 4.38 is actually baselined on my EF 2000 data add-on, so it includes all the work on the Eurofighter already. And I'm progressively transferring work from the previous OFM database for 4.37, so that includes the F-22. I'm also some other updates that I've developed recently, some minor cockpit fixes for the F-15E, the Aviate-B, and the Hornet. The OFM has its own Hornet flight model that's going in. I've been messing around with the Tomcat cockpit a little bit, and the F-22 is simply a transfer. So the model isn't new, the cockpit isn't new. I've taken a somewhat different approach, however, basing the flight model on the one that's available with some minor modifications, but mostly focusing on fixing the animations of the weapon base and also changing the loadout. So you now have the wing stations enabled, for example, which are, if I'm not mistaken, missing in the default F-22 in BMS. So weapon loadout changes. To be realistic, there's some work is ongoing for the F-35, and there are other aircraft that I meant to be transferred. I will primarily focus on quality enhancements in this respect, but we will see what other members in the community contribute. Also, in the end, I establish a baseline, and then we will see how it runs thereafter.
I see that. So I'm looking at your YouTube channel. It is EF2000 Retro. So that's the handle. It says at EF2000_retro. So he's on YouTube. Check him out. He has a whole bunch of videos on there. It talks about the F-22 and some of the testing he's doing. Has some F-35 stuff in there as well. Has some, I'm looking at here, has F-14 cockpit transfer tests. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. You can kind of follow along what he's doing in real time. His last update was yesterday. So he's definitely active on YouTube for the moment. So if you are interested in what else is going on in the mod community and as well, go ahead and give him a look at his YouTube channel. So as I'm looking on this YouTube channel, I see the METEOR. So the missile METEOR. So what type? I know the Eurofighter uses the METEOR as well. So is it implemented in your Eurofighter to use the METEOR, and what other capabilities does the METEOR missile give to BMS?
The METEOR video is actually not specifically about the METEOR, but it's part of the BMS modding tutorial series that I'm creating as a side project. The METEOR missile is also included by default in BMS, so there's not much difference compared to the default implementation. The only thing that I've changed is that I removed the lofting because the real missile does no lofting, but otherwise it's one-to-one the same as in stock BMS. So and it, of course, in comparison to the MRAM, it offers a longer range, significantly longer no escape zone, but that's not my work, that's default BMS content already.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I've a couple times I've messed around with a couple of the other aircraft in the METEOR. I think the no escape zone was like, at least symbology wise, was like 40 miles. So I think that's pretty insane for the no escape zone to be 40 miles for a missile. So yeah, so the METEOR's in there, and it can be used. And looking on Wikipedia here, the maximum speed is Mach 4, and it says that the operational range is about 75 miles, which is pretty crazy. And on here, on Wikipedia, it says the no escape zone is 37 miles. So I guess that kind of checks out. All depends on what aspect and what speeds and stuff, but the whatever baseline they use for that is about 37 miles. I don't know exactly what BMS does, but it's about 40 miles in my testing there. So with the F-22, is it? I'm going on a limb here, but is it does it have its own avionics, or is it kind of F-16 base, or are you trying to make it towards the F-22 type of symbology thing, like the same thing when you do with the Eurofighter, or kind of go over a little bit more on the F-22 if you have some knowledge on it?
Um, I'm not doing that much work on the F-22. I have transferred the 3D model and cockpit, which have been originally created by Metalhead. They have been featured by the OFM theaters since a very long time, I think, since its inception already. So it's not new at all, and my work has been mostly limited to transfer the stuff and do some bug fixes. But there's not more planned for the moment.
Okay, and I guess the RCS, they do the general sense where it's a arbitrary number and it works with the RCS. Do you know if the stealth is like implemented where it just makes it a smaller F-16 code wise, or is that how that kind of works?
It's simply a reduced factor in relation, so to speak. So code-wise, yes, it's a smaller RCS F-16 if you want to take it this way. But what you can do in the meantime is defining, for example, the the RCS increase, for example, with open weapon bay doors, that's specific to aircraft with weapon bays. That's unique for them, but otherwise it's simply a different factor, so to speak.
Yeah, yep, yeah, I see that. It'll be difficult to be able to. I don't know if it has the data or the modding and code has the implementation of being able to change the RCS if a door opens in that sense, because that would be something that's definitely a factor when it comes to shooting missiles in stealth aircraft that have the missiles inside of the bays.
Yes, pretty much, yeah.
So with all of this mods, and I know DCS has the same type of community uh, work where they make mods of aircraft that may not be official to the DCS or Eagle Dynamics works. So that's kind of the same thing with BMS. However, in my opinion, it seems like the modding community in BMS is not as accepted as the modding community in DCS, where we can go back and forth of why that is. But what is the plan to be able to make mods? Is the plan to have it just only a low, like a medium fidelity, I guess, mod, or is the plan to eventually expand to a more higher fidelity aircraft, like in this case the Eurofighter? Is your plans to actually get a more a better representation of it, where like with the F-15 in BMS had, the F-15 was just F-16 avionics, and then they eventually actually gave it its own avionics. Is that kind of the same thing with the Eurofighter in BMS right now?
No, because as said already, you need to be a coder. I'm not a coder. You need access to the source code that's only available to the BMS team. So as a third-party modder, definitely you can't go beyond this. That's my perception, growing interest not only on behalf of the community, but also within the BMS team to also push development of other additional aircraft, creating custom avionics systems modeling for them. But one has to stay realistic. There are only limited resources, human resources, people with the ability to do this. So I wouldn't expect miracles, and I think we can be happy about any new aircraft they work on. So let's see, but not from my side. It's so to speak, not my construction side.
And with the low fidelity or lower fidelity aircraft, what is the, because you mentioned that you're interested in like Falcon 5.0 and the ability of having more airplanes and the quality of those airplanes. It's basically a fight between quality of the airplane when it comes to like full fidelity, this is what it actually is, and when it comes to the other side of it where the people just want to fly something in a general sense to be able to get the different systems of it and the different feel of the controls. Um, for our discussion here, and Fiscus, you could join in as well. What is which way do you kind of go in the simulation world? Because you got the people who want it to be the real thing, and then you have the people who just want to have like a basic type of airplane to be able to use it, maybe not to its full capability, but as a just a general sense to be able to use it in a very low fidelity way. And Fiscus, what are your kind of your thoughts on that? Would you rather want a real thing, or would you want more? It's basically it's quality versus quantity. Would you want more low fidelity stuff, or would you want less things, but it's like the full aircraft?
I'm kind of in between those two camps, so to speak. Uh, Me personally, like everyone, I think we all appreciate quality. I was absolutely amazed when they released the F-15 C into BMS in a full fidelity way. However, even before that, I've dabbled with other aircraft in BMS that are considered should we call them low fidelity and the medium fidelity-ish, like for example the Hornet and the Mirage. I took it in on board that I was not flying something that was an accurate representation of said aircraft, but I'm happy with um, messing around with different characteristics of the aircraft and with whichever aircraft it is, like for different engine capability, different weapon loadouts, different weapon quantities, all that stuff. I'm not at all against lower fidelity of aircraft in BMS. However, I can see the argument. I can understand why some people have the opinion that, hey, you're flying, I don't know, the Hornet, for example. You are flying the Hornet, but are you really flying the Hornet because you are flying something that looks like a Hornet, does not have the Hornet's avionics, has the Viper's avionics? So what are you really flying? Like, are you flying like kind of like we're flying a hybrid, which again, I am not against. I really enjoy flying the Hornet and the Mirage and whichever else. But I can see I can see both sides of the argument. But I would rather have lower fidelity in BMS and have other things to experiment with and dabble in than not have it at all and have like the BMS only locked to F16 and now F15.
Yeah, yeah.
That's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I could see that as well with when it comes to like the flexibility of using other airplanes. Because if you have another airplane and the engines are different, the size is different, the radar might be different, like just those three things right there changes your tactics in a combat environment. So your radar's less strong or more strong, you could see farther out, so you already have a tactic advantage there. Your engines are better and you can go up higher, and your tactics again change there as well. Whatever missiles you have, it changes there. So as long as the tactics change based on the capability of the aircraft, it is worth flying it. In my opinion, for for it to be actually useful in the skies of BMS. Because if you have an F-16 and you flip it to an F-15 and it's literally the same thing, the only reason why you're flying it, or the only reason why it's there, because it looks different. So there's no like actual value to have it in the game if everything else is the same except it just looks different. So there's no tactics differences, there's no missile differences, there's no power differences, and it's completely pointless to have it in there unless you're just making a movie and you want it to fly around and look cool, I guess. But even with the EF-2000, he mentioned that he had different missiles, the radars changed, the at least the cockpit is different. It has a better, or it's not just a F-16 cockpit inside of the EF-2000, so at least it's a different visual on that, and it just different tactics that you use. So I would think if you could use different tactics from the airplane, that makes it valuable to be able to use to get a different sense of it in the simulator. But if you're just looking for just a visual thing, then I mean you could just do whatever. You could probably fly a helicopter in Falcon BMS, and it whether or not that's accurate or not, but you could at least get the sense of flying a helicopter low to the ground. And Scorpion, you mentioned that you also liked. Seems like you kind of had the same thoughts as us as well when it comes to high fidelity versus low fidelity.
Generally spoken, what I admired about the 1990s Comet flight sims was that a lot of advanced aircraft, future aircraft back then, like the F-22 or EF-2000, were simulated. So I kind of dislike today's discussions about, oh, it's not full fidelity, so it must not be in DCS or blah, blah, blah. I think, of course, it would be desirable if it would be full fidelity, but what does it mean anyway? I guess the vast majority of people has no clue what the real aircraft is capable of. Many have some Wikipedia knowledge, knowledge you can't even tell it. It's beliefs, so to speak, based on some random information. I really dislike this, that kind. all for. Of course, high fidelity is great, but I don't mind if it's a little bit simplified. But of course, BMS is different in this respect. So lower fidelity could be something like the Flaming Cruise 3 for DCS, maybe a little bit more than that. But you get custom systems modeling and avionics, but it's simplified. So that's the difference in flying an aircraft with essentially the systems modeling of another aircraft. So of course, that's not the most desirable solution as such. So it also depends simply on what you like. If there's a cool aircraft that you really would like to fly, you probably prefer to fly it in lower fidelity better than not flying it at all, because not every single bolt and screw is being modeled on the texture.
Yeah, I could see that because there are people who fly whatever airplane, and there are people who don't have never seen an airplane before, so they don't know, they can't compare it to anything. And the F-16 in BMS and the F-16 in DCS, when people compare the two, they're like, oh, the F-16 in DCS is more accurate than BMS, or more accurate than DCS. They don't really have anything to actually compare it to, so they're just comparing it to each other. And when you compare two flight simulators together, it is literally pointless to compare two flight sims together. So you need to have some sort of real life accuracy to it, and BMS has those type of, they have the white pages on how the flight controls are. They have the white pages of the environment and the different systems that the F-16 has. So they have all the stuff backed up with the actual documents that they have. And if you compare the two without having actual real life data, then there's no reason to go back and forth on it. Like with the F-35 coming out to DCS at some point, no normal person knows how the F-35 handles or knows what it's like to fly it, but there are videos on YouTube that show you what the general symbology looks like, so you can model it off of that and compare it off that, because the people making the F-35 will probably use those exact same documents and videos to be able to at least get the symbology right. But when it comes to the stuff that you don't see, there's going to be a slight bit of guessing from the developers to be able to guess and of course not make it realistic because they don't know what it realistic looks like. But there's always going to be that slight guessing, educated guessing to put it into the game so it won't just be blank. So as you said, most people aren't going to know what it actually should feel like or how it should function. So there's no really comparison for a normal person to actually compare it and like judge it, quote unquote, what it's supposed to be like in real life.
Personally, now you brought up this F-35, the F-35 thing going to to DCS. I have, and I don't want to like derail this conversation into being the the opinions versus DCS thing, but for the longest time, I this was something that it's bizarre to me, and I know some people as well share this opinion, but I remember when I played DCS and the Hornet came out, people were like, cool, Hornet, great. Viper's coming along, excellent. How about a Super Hornet? For the longest time, the argument from Eagle Dynamics themselves would be, oh, we cannot find publicly accessible data enough to accurately portray the Super Hornet because we want to have from so whatever point it was, we want to have accurate representations of the modules. Every single aircraft that we are going to be putting into the sim in the future needs to have like a baseline of publicly accessible data to have an accurate representation of the aircraft. And now we have like this is pretty much a 180 of putting in an aircraft that, for all intents and purposes, the cockpit is supposedly classified, the way the systems work are classified, all these things, and they are are they still using the terminology of it being full fidelity? I'm not sure if they like rephrased it on their material, but they are putting something like that on there, and now they're going to be putting in the Rafale too, which I know, if I know something about the French military, is that they are very stringent with sharing data. So I don't know what's going on. It's kind of strange, but that's just my 2 cents about this.
Yeah, I could kind of see the tornness between the two because they on one hand they're wanting to kick out an F-35 and a Rafale, and then the other hand they don't want to make a Super Hornet, which you could I'm pretty sure 99% of people who want the Super Hornet you could slap. I'm pretty sure. I mean the Super Hornet external model is just out there. You could just make an external model, make the intakes not circular, make it square, update the engines based on the power levels, the fuel, and other external model stuff, and then you could literally put the F-18 Hornet cockpit into the Super Hornet cockpit. And I'm pretty sure 90% of people will be happy.
Yeah, and I've read somewhere, at least again, it's the internet. Like maybe the person where I read this from was lying, but I read somewhere that a guy who flew or was around Super Hornet said, "Look, the Super Hornet, basically the major difference. Oh, the systems, we don't know how they are. Great. The Super Hornets, basically from the Hornet, is that they has colored color MFDs against the normal Hornet and DCS, which is monochrome.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep. That's it.
So what's the major holdup? It's bizarre, but yeah, like I said, I'm derailing, and I didn't want to make this
No. I mean,
episode
it's
about
it's all
DCS.
on all on the subject of modding. So I mean, that's what modders have to do. They have to have a fine line between uh, to the extremes, making stuff completely up. So making it up to the extreme and like finding everything you can to make it completely accurate. And there's always that line somewhere in the middle based on the feedback from the players of where they want to be in the middle. And of course whether or not they want to pay for it depending on which game you're playing. So there's always that fight between with modders to be able uh, to have it making stuff up or making it completely realistic. And that's, of course, has to deal with the amount of time that the modders put into the module or mod or platform or whatever. It all depends on how much time and effort they want to put into the project, that is. And it makes it easier if the modder, the person modding it, is their passion, like Scorpion. Like it's his passion to make the EF-2000, the Eurofighter. So he just does it in his spare time. If you don't like the airplane and you're doing it in your spare time, that scale of making stuff up and having it real might be catered towards making stuff up because you don't really care about it. So there's always that fine line of making your effort to make a mod there.
But I am interested in hearing what Scorpion has to say about this, about adding like companies, specifically DCS, and it seems micropros with Falcon 5 are going to embark into this in the same business model of having paid modules, and they already confirmed that one aircraft on Falcon 5 is going to be the F-35. What do you think about this situation of push and shove between, oh, we want to put in this aircraft because we don't have data for it enough, and then go turn around and put in like an aircraft that the majority of it is classified?
I think it's a little bit also about the balance. You can have an aircraft somewhat simplified that may make it a little bit easier to use for the end user, but you also don't get exactly the same amount of capability. So if you keep a halfway balance, you can even mix them in. So I think the normal, let's say, Flaming Chris 3 aircraft level, I don't think that these aircraft have a big advantage over any high fidelity modules in DCS. So making up stuff is relative. The question is, do you get what is available reasonably implemented and have a good representation of the capabilities, generally spoken, even if you don't have everything. And even BMS does not model certain stuff. If you look at the Link 16, it's so to speak, it's cool that we have it in, and great work by TIAC in particular, but it's just a tiny fraction of what Link 16 is capable in the rear aircraft. So we never get full fidelity, and you have to take into account that such aircraft are to a large extent software driven. They get regularly updated. They get new hardware installed as long as they are in production and through retrofit upgrade programs. So it's even somewhat pointless to discuss this as the aircraft are moving as well. And if you want to really full fidelity, then please program in the bugs as well. No real aircraft is bug free either. So that's something that a lot of people would complain about, but it's the same in reality as in complex sims. You have bugs, not everything works as advertised. Some things don't work at all, others are compromised, and so on. Oh, yes. And by the way, where we talked about it, isn't there a Super Hornet mod based on the FA-18C? So you have your Super Hornet.
Yep, there we
But
go.
otherwise, that it might be that they are newer aircraft that have some better public coverage where you can find more information than some older aircraft. That's also a fact. And if they feel confident that they can do an F-35 to a reasonable degree, and I think they already said it will be Block 2B, so very, very early, and not the latest and greatest. Supposed to be comes out in the future, Block 4. And also not Block 3F or something like that. Only Block 2B, that was the standard back in 2015, so a decade ago. And remember when the first F-16 Sims came out, it started in the 80s. Yeah, the F-16 was still brand new back then. Of course, these were not high fidelity Sims in the modern sense, but nevertheless.
You mentioned bugs. So yeah, the aircraft are now, especially now, they're just computers with wings. So we all know what happens with our computers, and if something doesn't work, you have to shut it off and start over. So imagine that the same thing happens with airplanes, where if your radar doesn't work, your EW system doesn't work, your whatever operational flight program, so like the operating system on the aircraft doesn't boot up correctly, you have to shut down the aircraft and turn it back on. That's literally all the different things that happens with different aircraft depending on their software version. So like you said, if you want it to be full fidelity, you'll have to introduce the bugs of the software in the aircraft. And people don't want to have that, and it'll be nice to be able to turn it off or turn it on or have it realistic or just simplistic of that. But no one wants to be in an event with 30 something people and your radar doesn't work for it 90% of the time, and you're just there for emotional support of the people. So no one wants that. But if you want to have a realistic experience, that is the realistic experience. So it also depends on what the people want from the experience and from the mods and from the airplanes. If they want to have a completely realistic experience of what it's like to be a real fighter pilot, then they could go the way that happens, where you just sometimes don't fly because your aircraft is literally broken. And on the other side of that, you just want people to just the extremes. You just want people to go out there and start shooting stuff immediately. That's where you have to uh, lessen the fidelity of the airplane, so people can just they don't have to press buttons inside of the cockpit. They could press, I don't remember what is in DC yet, but like the start, you could just start it by itself and have it start. You can get up in the air really quickly. So it all depends on what the player or the user wants from the sim, dictates what the fidelity and the usage rate of the software is, like the airplanes. So it depends on the user as well.
At least if you are a commercial company and want to make money, so you have to listen to the community and what the majority wants, because there's where the money lies. For me, as a third-party modder who does all that on a voluntary basis, I have no obligations, so I can do what I want at the level what I want. That's also comfortable in this respect, and Yes, if people aren't able to manage their expectations, that's their problem, I have to say.
Yeah, that too with the expectation from other people. So if you're paying $60 for something, the expectation is pretty high for it to be pretty well, and have it to have uh, updates every so often to make it better. Because we have this early access thing where you pay the full amount and it's early access. So there's bugs like kind of in real life. So I guess that's kind of realistic in a sense, jokingly. But you have all the bugs. You might not have this system or that system, and you paid for it, and it's early access, and it may take 5 years for it to get out of quote unquote early access. And on the other hand, it might still be in early access. So it's like, when does it actually get out of early access after you paid for it? But it all depends on what the user wants and what they're expecting from the software they're using. And like you said, with volunteer base, they just do whenever. And if it's free, there's not much expectation. Whatever you get, they'll just be happy with because it was very free, and they just respect the people making it in their spare time to be able to use it and the quality of it at the moment. Scorpion, we're going to do some quick questions here. So what's your favorite aircraft other than the I guess we can, of course, we can probably assume that your favorite aircraft is the Eurofighter, but other than the Eurofighter, what is your second aircraft to fly in BMS and why?
I essentially spend most time with developing stuff, so I'm not flying that much at all. Um, yeah, so in BMS I don't really fly that much, also except for development testing, mostly for the time being.
What aircraft are you interested in? Like if you had to choose an aircraft to fly, or I guess what role would you want? You want air to air role or air to ground role? I know the Eurofighter can kind of do both, but what is your what direction do you kind of gravitate to?
A bit to both, and I like the Tomcat. I like also the Raptor, the Rafale, the Flanker, different variants. So would be nice to have any of these.
And the Tomcat, have you flown the Tomcat in BMS? I mean, it's like a very well. The thing is that people like about it is the Phoenix, so you can shoot that thing really far, and that's somewhat implemented, and it's really capable of shooting something very very far.
Not in BMS, to be honest, except for the test flying that I've recently done. The last time I played the Tomcat was somewhere in the 2000s in Super Pick 4 or something like that.
Okay. And so you're doing the Eurofighter now. So if you could make another full fidelity aircraft for BMS, let's just say that the Eurofighter is done, it's complete, you're happy with it. If you had the time to move on to something else, what aircraft would you choose to work on in BMS and why?
Difficult to say, to be honest. Maybe when I have done more work, I will simply go to fly more, spend more time flying than always developing only.
That make that makes sense because yeah, it's nothing about you could mod stuff all your simulator career, and then you don't really get to enjoy it at the end. So that's something that everybody should be able to do, is to enjoy what they made and maybe what other people made as well, and definitely get into that that sense of community when it comes to flying with other people. Because when you're flying with other people, they're your wingman, and you're like a team, and you're doing stuff. It's a different pace when versus modding something, because you're always I would assume it's mostly by yourself. You're modding stuff. So when you get into communities and actually start flying with people, you're actually flying with other people, and it gets more it's more of a community. You're able to interact with the community a little bit better, and it's very nice.
Yes, certainly. But I have last time I flew multiplayer must be 20 years ago. But yes, it would certainly be nice at some point when I have the time for it.
Yeah, it's definitely changed since then. The people have changed, and at least for BMS, it hasn't really changed when it comes to how to log in. But when it comes to the people and the fidelity of the missions, because the missions have definitely changed a lot with different communities doing 30-player missions with briefings and debriefings, and the the way that TACView does, where you can actually see what you're doing now and can go through and see all the parameters of when you shot the missile, how you got hit, how fast the missile was going that hit you, and all these different things when it comes to fidelity of debriefing has definitely changed from 30 years ago, with the visuals of actually putting the fight on a screen and being able to see everything.
Yes, all that stuff has changed dramatically. There's virtually not a single aspect of Falcon 4.0 that has not been touched by the community. Maybe some little tiny code here and there, but generally spoken, everything has been further developed. You can still very much recognize the heritage of the original F4, but BMS is essentially a new combat flight sim, that definitely.
So we and the listeners do appreciate your insight and your time that you took it out for answering some of our questions and telling your story of BMS and about the Eurofighter and the mods that the OF the the OFM makes for the BMS community. Do appreciate it. And anything else you want to say to the viewers before we sign off here?
Thank you for the invitation. It was a joy to be with you today, have shared with you, and I just say go out, have fun, go flying.
Yes, definitely go flying. And Fiscus, anything else from you?
I just wanted to thank Scorpion for joining us. I know everybody or a lot of people appreciate his hard work. I've dabbled in it myself, tried it out. Congratulations, you have one of the most successful and sought after mods in aircraft mods in BMS. That's an achievement, I think. And yeah, thanks for coming on, Scorpion. It was really nice learning about your history and about the. Really enjoyed learning about uh, the the other sims, the other sim that the Eurofighter is based on. The origin of BMS or Falcon rather was something I didn't expect to learn today, and I'm happy that I did. And yeah, thanks for the listeners for stopping by and listening to our podcast, and hopefully see everyone in the next one.
Yep, I'll see you. Thanks.